They gave him both.
They were like, just both.
Hunter or Michael.
It's a badass name. It sounds like a Mission Impossible type name, Hunter Michael.
Oh, good. I like that.
Or
like a secret agent.
Like, yeah,
I prefer that over people will say serial killer.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
One is more flattering. So
Alrighty.
Shall we retake?
Let's retake this. All right. Alrighty. Here we are. How you guys doing?
So good.
Great. So Hunter, thank you for coming back on.
My pleasure.
We had an amazing last podcast.
I agree.
Yes. And Kris, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Really good.
Awesome.
We got our water and our blueberries.
Got everything we need.
Feeling really nice.
I got my notepad in case information comes across. That'll be very beneficial, which I'm sure it will.
One hopes.
Let's just start with you, Kris.
Yeah.
What is your story? What are your interests?
Story. Yeah. So I'll start with we met a few years back and realized we had a lot of similar interests. I've been studying philosophy and psychology and a lot of the social sciences for the better part of the last 12 years, I think. And so he said something about free will or something, and I think it triggered. I was like, "Ooh, I like this." And then we started talking, and we haven't stopped since.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
And you're a musician. You're a musician. You're a teacher.
I'm a musician and a teacher. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm a choir director at Cleveland High School, which is just north of LA.
Awesome.
Which is really fun. Not in Ohio.
What kind of music do you play other than church music?
I teach choir, I play keys, and I sing.
Nice.
And then, yes, also I am a church musician. I'm a
Nice.
music director at a church.
Awesome.
And it's fun. I
Yeah,
like
for
it.
sure.
My whole living is basically music.
Awesome.
I'm also like a nutrition and health geek and studied that a lot.
Awesome. Remember, I think maybe lean in a little bit more.
Hello.
Or, I mean, you could do that if you want, or you guys can also pull the mic back and forth.
Yeah, I
It's
can.
Oh, yeah.
totally
That's
fine.
good. We can
Next
lean
goal
in.
is get another mic.
Yeah,
Have a
no,
3
that's
mic
right.
setup for sure for the next one.
It's good.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's me, and I just thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I love
for
these.
sure.
I love these kinds of conversations, and when people are interested in these sorts of things and can speak about them well, and just have an interest and are
Yeah.
inquisitive, it's like a magnet to me. I just
sure.
love it. I want to be around it. It helps me to learn, helps me to grow, and I really enjoy it. So,
Thank you. Yeah,
for
I feel
having
the
me.
exact same way. Thank you
think
for
it's
coming
great.
on. I think that's how him and I hit it off. We just started talking about those interesting ideas at an IDW meetup, and totally, I'm engaged
That's
with all
right.
of this stuff. So
you know when it clicks.
yeah, for sure. So this podcast, I think, is just kind of an open, the last podcast, it was so awesome having you on, having a therapist
Thank
on,
you.
because it was
Thank
like an amazing introductory podcast to the idea of the podcast, to myself. It's a great dynamic. But this one, I think let's just make it more of a casual conversation. I had an idea.
Perfect.
Yeah, I had an idea of I just started re-listening to the Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson debates. So it's my second time listening.
Okay.
I just thought we could start there, throw that on the table, and then just go from there. No rules, talk about whatever you guys want, but just have that as like a starting point.
Are you referring to the podcasts or the live events or both?
Both, I guess.
Okay.
I was listening to the podcast recently.
Oh, okay.
No, I was listening to the live events recently,
Oh, okay.
actually. So,
Okay.
so yeah, we could just kind of start there.
Yeah.
Like my views are kind of, after listening to them the past few days, I don't really side on either one of their sides, honestly. Like I really don't lean, like I don't have an exact, I think Sam Harris, I'm with him, I'm with Jordan Peterson. I'm like right in the middle, I guess, or I'm trying to be. Like I'm trying to really listen to both sides and understand, like, to me, the question seems more about the conversation that's being had. Like that's the question. Why is that conversation so invigorating to so many people right now,
Love
rather than the actual topics that are like being talked about between
the
them?
content,
It's
right.
why is it so invigorating to people right now?
Well, if I can plug, I think also just like Kris was saying, the type of conversations that you can have with somebody is much more important to me than the content of those conversations. And
For sure.
but where you and I met, I was really reluctant, actually. Like I get a lot of the times when I find a new social group or a new, even a format or a way of meeting other people that is so filtered that it doesn't allow for a lot of novelty. So I worry about joining up with people who already agree 100% or think exactly like me.
Yeah.
And
With you.
so fortunately, when you have a friendship with somebody and it's not just a collegial or a professional style conversation,
Yeah.
you can always fall back on the friendship, and you can trust that the other person more or less wants the same things as you.
Yeah.
So disagreeing is not a threat to your relationship. It's just a conversation about those ideas. And if we're being really humble, then we might even agree, hey, by the way, we're going to talk about this thing, and we're not going to figure any of this out today. Like this conversation is not going to start and end
For sure.
right here in this conversation we're about to have.
100%.
So
as appealing as that might be.
right, and as tempting as it might be to think,
Right.
oh, we'll just be done with this.
And I'll say, when that becomes the goal, you often find more confrontation.
Yeah.
Because people are rushing to those conclusions. They say, no, by the end of this, I want you to know that I'm right.
Yeah.
Or you to know that you're wrong.
For sure.
And that leads to so many, again, that's the attachment to outcome, And I'm totally with you. I think the process is the more important part.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can have those conversations.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
About the technical issue, we had a technical issue. I just think I find that with anyone, it's an extremely, in my life, and it has been my whole life, it's a rare thing to find someone that like consciously makes a decision to try to have these types of dialogues without being attached to your ideology. I mean, it's how conversations need to be had about any important topics, right? We're not here to force our opinions. We're here to have conversation to expand our own knowledge and maybe find some answer that can help us win together, right? And both of you guys seem to have that same mentality. So yeah, I definitely respect that. And want more people like you guys to come on the podcast. It's definitely a central point of this podcast is that kind of thing. So
it's huge.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, in the debates, in the Harris Peterson debates, I was also noticing. So I'm also invigorated by the content, the subject matter of the conversation was great.
Yes.
But I could tell both of those guys were getting frustrated with the applause effect.
Yeah.
Where there were clear Petersonians and Harrisites, and they were why they were there. They were there to
the Clash of Clans.
Yeah, right. To not have to move the dial at all. To just be kind of vindicated more or less, and make sure that they didn't have to didn't have to agree too much with the other guy.
Yeah. Definitely.
I hope never to be in that boat, although I can feel that tug. I can feel that the feeling of going, that's what I think.
Yeah.
But then checking in with myself and going, okay, now I'm doing it. Now I'm being one of those people. It's very difficult to resist that, right? For
sure. And I think when I first came across Jordan Peterson, which we kind of talked about on the last podcast, he was an insanely important figure that helped me crawl out of the hole I was in. And I did attach to things very quickly with him. It took a while to get to that place where I realized what I respected about him a lot was the fact that he was one of the guys in the IDW that's completely open to having these conversations without that crazy forcing of ideology. But in the very beginning, really did the same thing, attached to things he was saying about Christianity, attached to all the religious stuff. And even at work, I would talk about all this stuff.
Oh, really?
It just from a standpoint as if I knew something. And
you get fired up.
Oh, get fired up. Now I'm way more wanting to just explore ideas with a completely open mind. My mind can be changed at any moment, anytime, if something really is compelling. And it's about the overarching idea of completely opening up the dialogue to ideas.
Yeah.
And for me, compassion, it's about that compassion, the attention, paying attention to other people and having compassion for other people, because that's lacking so much. I mean, I feel like what I see on a daily basis, it's lacking. And when I say compassion too, I don't mean hippy dippy, love everybody in every moment. I mean recognizing someone as a seriously complex person that has issues too, the same as you. And I'm not more important than you. You're not more important than me. So opening up these types of conversations is, that's what I want to do. So, anyway.
So tell me about your original draw to Peterson. Why was he the perfect key to your keyhole at that moment? Why him? And then I guess my follow-up would be, is there anything that now do you feel like you're still in kind of that honeymoon phase, or are you fading? Are you disagreeing with him ever?
Yeah, really good
or
questions.
doing your own thing?
Really good questions. And I haven't even really sat down and thought about this stuff and written. So this might come out sloppy. Like, that's an amazing question for me to explore right now, which I guess the best way for me to answer that is just telling you the experience as like subjectively or as objectively as I can, which was, I really remember the moment when the light was turned on. I don't know a better way to phrase it. Like when it clicked, which I was in an old apartment I was at, sitting on a couch. I think I was drunk. I think I was smoking. I was high. I was drinking. Completely just felt no motivation, nothing. I felt that feeling of complete hopelessness. And I came across Jordan Peterson. It was on Joe Rogan, and it was just a clip. And it was the clip reconciling science and religion. It's like a 45-minute clip. And I just came across it. Sounds interesting. I've always been interested in science and physics and, religious stuff. I mean, here and there. So I just clicked on it and watched it. I think that was actually the very first video of Jordan Peterson I saw, was that one. I don't know if you guys know which one I'm talking about, but
maybe, yeah. If I saw
sorry.
it.
And I just watched the video, and it was like he was saying shit.
It's like a light bulb.
Yeah, it's like a light bulb. It's like what he says all the time. It's been said so many times. He was saying stuff that I felt inside me. I felt those truths, those, you don't even have to call them truths. I felt those emotions and that feeling of there's something more. This life can't just be fucking meaningless. Like, there's something more to this. And he was articulating it so well, but not only that, but he had so much passion. Like, he had so much passion talking about it. And it woke me up. And like, even going past the religious aspect and the values and reinvigorating that in me, it was so engaging and interesting to me that it kind of pushed me to explore something. At that time of my life, I was kind of like completely lost and like hopeless. I wasn't doing anything. I didn't have a hobby. I wasn't enjoying my job. My relationship was horrible. Or I think even at that time, the relationship was over at that point. So I was like, there was nothing. Like, I was I was like a robot day to day, just like getting out of bed with no drive to do anything or no interest. And that video just interested me so much, talking about the deep religious things, the psychology of the religion, how it came to be, or at least the theory of the stories that are told, us observing the stories and then writing the stories down. And so that was the initial draw, was, I guess, waking up that deeper feeling that there's something more, that there's something in all of us that's more and meaningful. And then from there, I just kind of explored a lot of his videos and watched one of his videos that went viral, where he was like talking to a college student saying, "Of course you're a victim. We're all victims."
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck,
That's
like,
a good
I've had
one.
this horrible mentality.
That's
like,
a good one.
grow the fuck up. Like, I remember thinking that, and it just pushed me to kind of grow up really fast. And I've been exploring it ever since. And yeah, there are things, I mean, I go in and out. Like, I think it's hard to even say where Jordan Peterson stands on God. Like, we talked about it. Like, it's hard to know, like, where if he believes in God in a traditional sense or not. Like, it's really hard to get where he's coming from. I tend to kind of feel like he doesn't believe in God in the traditional Christian God sense from stuff that he says. And so there are things that I disagree. Like, I don't think Christianity is the story, like we talked about. I don't think it's the best one. I don't think that. I think they're all important. They're all attempts to try to understand, like, what the fuck it means being a human. That's what all of them are. And I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in that question.
The common thread
Between all of them. I'm more interested in, like, what's the common thread? Why? And how is there any way to bring them together to form some story or some system of values or some way, like Sam Harris. I mean, I feel like Sam Harris, he's not with the religion, but that's what he's trying to do in a different way, right? I mean, he's like trying to, I don't know exactly. That's a good thing that we can go into. So one of you guys can clear me up on Sam Harris's position, fully, if one of you guys kind of get where he's coming from more. But anyway, that's kind of that's kind of what it is for me. Like, I'm more interested in maybe something deeper, like kind of the why. The why does religion exist? Why? And why has it been around for so long?
Why does it still exist?
Why does it still exist?
Right.
Why can't people let go?
Right.
And why does it cause so much horrible things to happen? Why does it cause a lot of good things? You know,
What would you do with an answer to that question?
I don't think there is an answer, but I would.
Well, there's your answer.
I mean, there.
Guess we don't need it.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some answer, but I mean, the answer.
It's hard. It's a very complex issue.
I tend to think that maybe the answer is kind of. I was thinking about this earlier today, like thinking about, like, what are you?
What do you mean?
What are you as a human? Like, what are you? If you had to, it's a complex thing.
Personally?
It's such a broad
Or you mean
question.
a person? What
like
is
a person? What is a person?
Mm.
What is a person? Like, if it's there's obviously the objective answer, your particles put together in a perfect way, your brain. But I tend to think, like, what is a human? A human is a fucking story. That's what a human is. Like, if you think about it in terms of you're born and then you have this life and you die, and when you're on your deathbed looking back, what do you remember? You don't remember your whole life in every moment. You remember the important parts, the meaningful parts of your life.
Unless you have amnesia, you don't
Unless you
remember
have
anything.
amnesia, and then, you don't. But, and if you think about it in that way, like, that's what a movie is, right? What is a movie? A movie is a story. And what is a movie? It's an accumulation of, like, these really important, meaningful parts of someone's life. And that's kind of what we are, at least. Obviously, this is just my opinion, but I think of it that way, and it makes me think, like, well, no fucking duh, stories are so important. Like Yuval Harari talks about, like, stories are so important. Everything is a story, everything is a story. And it's because that's, like, what we are.
Yeah.
We're navigating through this life with an infinite amount of information coming in, trying to just figure out how to, like, move forward to help us and help other people if we can.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I could rant on forever, but I really want to hear what you guys think about.
Well, I have a thought, just sort of going back. I love when you're talking about how Peterson sort of drew you in.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned it wasn't just what he was saying, but how he was saying it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
To me, I think the pragmatist in me is kind of screaming, like, function, function, function. A lot of people have this aversion to when people say things so confidently.
Yeah.
Aversion.
Right.
Aversion.
Yeah. They're not. Some people will say things like, "Oh, Jordan Peterson just sounds confident," and so, but what he's saying is racist and sexist and all this. They go nuts, and but I would suggest that if he said things less confidently, it wouldn't have the effect.
I agree.
If he went up there and was like, "Well, I think this might be true.
But what do I know?
I'm only about 50% sure."
Yeah, for sure.
And if you were to follow this formula of life, it could get better or not.
Yeah.
It could get worse. I'm not really sure, right? And that might actually be the honest answer.
Yeah.
But the reality is that he's at least more than 50% sure.
Yeah.
And probably closer to 70 or 80.
I mean,
he's seen it work over and over again.
And that's an amazing, why is that the case? I think that's a really good thing to talk about and it goes back into the story.
Why is what the case?
Why is it the case that people who are amazing, articulate speakers that speak with passion are the ones that truly drive changes and stuff? And it's because they're good storytellers, right? That's what it seems like people want and seek.
Because we have narratives in our mind, right? And so when certain narratives are actually destructive, when you hear someone with a less destructive narrative, right? Someone that can reframe your story in a way that's meaningful, you latch onto it, And he doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And this is what I've been saying. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about this. When I go to college, do I agree with every single college professor? No. Does that mean that I just walk out of the classroom? No, that's insane. Yeah. When I go to church, do I agree with every single pastor? No. Does that mean that I just leave the church? That's insane.
Yeah.
But we expect that from certain people like Peterson, where it's like, well, not everything he says is perfect. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But does that mean that you'll just shun him out as this voice that has nothing valuable to say? I think that's dogma.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't think that's useful.
It's a good point, for sure.
And so I love that you're talking about that he had the passion. That's what drew me too.
Yeah.
The fact that he
Yeah, how did you kind of get into it?
I think a similar thing. I mean, it was one of those, you're just on YouTube one day and all of a sudden it was like, oh, you listen to this. You might also like this. And I was like, oh, I think I do.
Yeah.
And I don't remember, I I read through Maps of Meaning after seeing him on a podcast, and then read the other book, the 12 Rules for Life. And I was really drawn, just having a background in like religious studies and some of the world's religions and how they kind of intersect or how they don't. And specifically Christianity, I was drawn to the series on Genesis.
Oh yeah,
and so I just love I love those lectures, and there's so much good stuff there, and it's really dense.
Definitely.
And this is another point. A lot of people will never hear those, because they can't stand what they think he's saying. Sometimes,
yeah, that's very true.
And I think, there is so much profundity that you're missing out on.
Yeah.
Just like ignoring a college professor that you don't agree with on every point. So I just wanted to say that I love that it was the passion and the story, just like you're saying, the narrative, that I think really draws us to people.
Yeah, and I'm also like very aware of the fact that that's what it was. Like I'm not saying Jordan Peterson is this amazing guy who knows it all, and he's like this cool, like, he just has all the answers. He's the guru. And maybe right in the beginning, I was like, oh wow, he's, it was that. But, I'm very aware of it now that he has that ability to speak in a way that's like invigorates you. And that was a big part of it for me. And I think for a lot of people, that's the case. And now it's been over a year of kind of in and out of bad times and good times and exploring these ideas. And I'm more of in a place of, I want to explore this stuff myself. I want to just explore it myself and ask the questions and get people on and see what they think about it, and totally interested in like the whys. And the podcast is called Bearing the How. So it's also like, okay, why? Well, if you're religious, there's a why for you. If you're not religious and you're a Sam Harris type, then you're coming from a more like intellectual place with it, or it'd still be cool to get someone's opinion on Sam Harris, because there's a lot of stuff with him that I'm just foggy on. I need to look into him more for sure.
Like what in particular?
Well, like how would you sum up his kind of point in those debates? Maybe like what is
with Peterson?
Yeah, like what is
in their fourth? I know I don't know that I could do it perfectly, but I think it was in the fourth debate in maybe London, I want to say.
Yeah.
Was London, or
was it Douglas Murray?
Or was
Dublin and then
Dublin?
London, or London and then Dublin? Either way.
Yeah, the fourth.
The moderator, who I think was Douglas Murray.
Douglas
Murray at that point.
I think he was in the third and the fourth.
He asked.
He was great.
Maybe I don't know if it was. I think Brett Weinstein might have had the original idea, but they were asked to steel man each other's perspectives.
Yeah.
So they kicked off each. They kicked off at least that night. It was great. Yeah. And both of them did a fantastic job. And the idea is make the strongest case for the other person.
Keep going. I'm going to just quickly. I'm listening.
Oh, okay. Make the strongest case for the other person's point of view that encapsulates their worries as well as their position, such that they agree that is the strongest case to be made,
as opposed to a straw man, which many people do.
Exactly. And both of them did it fantastically. Yeah. So if you really want to know. You could easily look that up, and it's just right at the beginning of that debate.
I thought that was great. Yeah,
should have done that before the podcast. Written it down.
Maybe, but
now,
whatever.
Now everyone else knows to go do it.
Now they can go do that.
This is interpret it yourself.
It's a good moment in the debate.
I don't know personally what their impetus was for scheduling, other than popular demand.
Yeah,
they had those 2 podcast episodes. The first one went awry. The second one was much better, and then they hadn't even met in person, I think, until that first of the 4 live debates. And I don't want to speak for Sam, but just from what I know, he's concerned that false metaphysical claims are being smuggled in via human stories. So while it can be very tempting and very pragmatic to use a story, like let's say the Christian story, or even some sort of story about meaning and responsibility, he worries that a lot of the terminology and a lot of the, he believes that it leads to a belief system which is allowing for other harmful belief systems or superstitious belief systems.
Jesus smuggling.
Jesus smuggling is a term that became a running joke there. Yeah. So, and Sam has an ethical, so he wrote The Moral Landscape as well. And he described what I think is maybe the best starting place for him philosophically is that facts and values are not necessarily independent, and that if you had every fact about the universe available to you, you could derive values from that. So that if we were trying to figure out what's the best way to proceed, how do we settle this disagreement, what are we supposed to do in this case, you could take inventory of everything you might need to know about that situation, about the harm being caused, about possible scenarios and parallel types of situations for the future. And you could come up with the appropriate ethical answer based on having all the data.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
That's my best summary of that.
Makes sense.
So,
Yeah.
Which I would, I guess I'm with Jordan Peterson that I would think, I wouldn't agree with that. I would think my first question, I'll get both of your guys' opinions with that, would be, well, isn't it, like, we'll never fucking know everything in the universe, right? I mean, there's no way that the universe is literally infinitely expanding.
There's a lot to know.
It's, so isn't that like a problem? Isn't that a problem? Just the fact that that's what it would take to derive values.
well, knowing everything and knowing enough, I think, is a relevant distinction.
Yeah.
And I guess that Jordan would probably come back to that by saying, when do you know that you know enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's my question.
Who's the arbiter of that truth and that reality? Who gets to say, okay, now we know enough. Now let's create a moral system.
Yeah.
I'm sort of Kantian when it comes to morality. I think that no matter what, you kind of just have to create a social contract and go with it. Which is what all societies do. And it's just like Yuval says, it's almost like those who are hardcore constitutionalists are just as religious as any other group. Not necessarily bad. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, they're not all created equal. So there are better and worse stories, you might say, or commitments.
And Sam Harris says that about religion. He seems to think that
there's a continuum there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you. I think this is such a complex issue. And where I lie on a lot of this, and we've talked a lot about this, and we don't even agree totally on these points. But partly is we're just trying to figure this out, right? I mean, it's so hard to know these truths.
Yeah.
I love his summary of Sam's ideas on values and morality. I read through that book also. And I also had, I think, the same qualms that Jordan Peterson had. Jordan Peterson pointed out, that still at the baseline level, at the sort of fundamental level of values, someone has to decide somewhere at some point that one thing is more important than another thing. And the hard part about that is who says who that guy is and why their idea of values is higher than the person next to them who disagrees.
Yeah.
And this is what unfortunately leads us to things like postmodernism. And I'm not saying I totally disagree with everything that postmodernism claims.
Yeah.
I think some of it's great.
Yeah.
But it goes too far when it begins to break down all morality, and it says, oh, everything is relative.
Yeah.
And
I'm with you there.
And this is Jordan's big apprehension. He says, well, hold on. When you get rid of some of these stories, and Yuval says the same thing. I think it's almost a direct quote from I think it was Homo Deus. He says that you can't have large scale order without religion. And he's not just talking about spiritual religion. He's not talking about like Islam or
supernatural religion. It doesn't have to be that.
He's really just talking about and he sort of loosely defines religion.
Gotcha.
But he's just talking about anything that is a system of order and ideals and beliefs and principles that are above and beyond individuals, right?
Gotcha.
Intersubjectively agreed upon realities, whether they're imaginative, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is. And I think I agree with that. I think you have, like you're saying, I think you have to have a story. And sometimes it's fiction, sometimes it's not. But it has to be there. I think it's an integral part of any orderly society. I've not seen society that's really arisen and done well without it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where Jordan Peterson kind of pushes back on Sam and says, hold on. I mean, when you begin to get rid of all of that, when you begin to get rid of all the stories, you throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. And I side with Jordan Peterson on that. You know, I don't know how much I side with him, but I side at least a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good way to describe all that, by the way. That cleared up a lot for me. And I would say that, like, I guess I kind of feel the same. I still feel like I would love to get your opinion too. Where are you at, like, with what he just said? What do you think about that?
That's tough to say.
Yeah.
I like to, I'll just back up even one step. I'm interested in a lot of different circles, and I'm interested in ideology in general.
Gotcha.
Anytime somebody is really, really, really committed to something, that interests me. All my favorite documentaries are about people with extreme lifestyles or commitments or anything like that. Just any stories, any fiction that I read is very extreme by nature, especially because of what Yuval says about our proclivity to share myths or to agree upon something that we never questioned may not really be the case.
Yeah.
We might say, of course, that this $100 bill is valuable, and if I dropped it, we would all go down to pick it up, and if I lost it, I'd be upset, and yet none of us would say, well, but look at it rationally. It's just a piece of paper, right? It's not that realization really even assuages my anxiety about losing that $100. I know it's just a piece of paper, and I still need it.
Yeah.
I need it to get, because and Yuval clarifies this obviously better than me, but it's not that I have to believe that it's valuable. I have to believe that everyone else believes it's valuable. So if I go into a new country and I say, no, you don't understand, $100 where I come from is very valuable. If I'm in France, they're going to say, I don't need your $100. I need euros, right? Because it does nothing for me.
Yeah.
I exchange it for euros, and all of a sudden I'm in business, right? So
relative value, yeah.
Yes, right. So when I, like, for example, if I bring up a name or a philosophy or a person, especially in my practice, or if I am working with people in treatment and we watch a TED Talk or something like that, I always give my disclaimer. I'm not endorsing necessarily this person or the set of ideas. I just want it to be thought-provoking. I want to hear something that even if I disagree with it, it helps me clarify what I've taken for granted. So if I watch Jordan Peterson and I'm scared of that, or if I have this visceral reaction or this opposition or this, turn that off, shut him down, get him out of here kind of reaction, I wonder, so I don't even know this guy, right? I don't know what he does in his spare time. I just know what he puts out there. So I'm interested, what am I reacting to, basically, right? I'm sympathetic if someone is doing harm in the world by announcing awful ideas. I want to know about that too. But kind of like when I go to the Harris-Peterson debate, I'm not interested per se in getting a win for a team. And
which is good. I'm with you.
Well, I hope not. I mean, like I said, I'm not immune to that sensibility, but I think I like on a personal level, Peterson is very interesting to me. You can listen to him. He's very charismatic, and he's hard to disagree with when you're just talking about intentions. Like, he just wants to do good in the world. He wants people to succeed, and he gets really choked up when he hears that people have these really positive outcomes based on his philosophy. And at the same time, Harris makes a lot of sense to me when he says, whoa, we should be really cautious about what kind of language we're using when we're describing these things, because this guy over here says Jesus is the Son of God and the way, the truth, and the life. And Peterson over here says, Jesus is the highest archetype of what a human being can be. And so those two people share this lexicon, and yet they would intend very different things for one's life, for my life, let's say.
Yep.
So they share the story, but they differ in interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that needs to be clarified. I agree with that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I also get a kick out of conflict in general. So I love watching the interplay between Sam trying to get Jordan to tie down his terms, and Jordan saying, how dare you make me tie down my terms? I'm trying not to tie down these terms. I'm trying to use them loosely.
Yeah.
When I say spirit or transcendent or fundamental or being itself, what does that even mean? And he'll explain what to do with those terms a lot of the times, but I understand Harris is stuck back at the kind of encyclopedia. Like, look, I still don't know what you mean when you say those things. So I don't again, Yuval Harari had a profound influence on me too, that you can stay with that observation that so much of what we think is a story in the first place, and you don't really have to commit one way or the other yet. You can always go further down the rabbit hole and say, but what about that? What about that? Why do I need that? Why do I love what Peterson is saying right now? Or why do I hate what he's saying right now? what does that imply about the way I go about my business every day? You know, how do I manifest what he's saying or what he's not saying? Yeah. Anyway,
No, I think
that's my kind
I
of
think that's
reaction.
I think that's a really good way to approach those debates and
Right.
everything. And do you think that has to do with that you're a therapist? Like you kind of have that, because a lot of people don't think that way when they watch those debates. There's definitely there's the two sides.
It's not
a tribalism.
That's
Yeah,
true.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that's not.
Runs deep.
Speaking about myself, that's not an innate propensity of mine necessarily. I mean, I've spent a lot of years, and talking to people like Kris too helps me, humbles me essentially. Or just when I'm getting a little confident about something, I'll read an author that I completely disagree with, and I'll go, "Oh, well, okay," you know.
Yeah.
Or if at worst, it just reinforces what I was thinking before. It goes, "Oh, good. That's why I wasn't doing that all these years.
Yeah.
I'm not losing any sleep over not being this way."
Yeah.
And that's fine too, right? And also, I don't think necessarily. I think it's the other way around. Not that being a therapist makes me that way, but I think I was probably drawn to doing therapy because of my interests in the first place. I chose the profession rather than the other.
Yeah.
way
Of
around,
course,
you know?
of course, that makes
Right.
definitely makes way more sense.
Yeah, and if I could just kind of piggyback,
Please.
I think one thing that they seem to disagree on, I'm not even sure we can say disagree because we don't get clear answers.
We're not sure.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But they get bogged down a lot on terms. And sometimes this happens to us. I mean, when we talk about things
Yeah.
like truth or God or goodness or beauty, what are we talking about? You know, I mean, we have to do, I mean, their first podcast was truth. The whole 2.5
the whole
hours,
thing.
whatever it was just all about, okay, wait, can you define truth? What do you
Yeah.
mean by truth?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's like,
for
okay,
sure.
well, there's objective truth. And he's like, and there's metaphysical truth, but it's
Yeah.
all truth.
Yeah.
And Sam has a problem with the fact that he sort of conflates terms, and I agree with Sam on that. I mean, that's something that I am a big stickler for words and terms and truth.
Gotcha.
Part of it's from like my just being a teacher. I mean,
Yeah.
if I say something to students that really isn't clear, there's a guarantee that in a class of 40 kids, at least 12 to 15 to 20 of them are totally lost, right? And unless they ask a question that gives me the opportunity to clarify, half of them are just confused for the rest of the semester.
Yeah.
And so, and I've noticed this when I'm kind of loose with terms or I'm not clear about what I expect in the assignment, things like that.
Gotcha.
And we've all experienced that, right? In classrooms when we're like,
course,
I don't
of
really.
course.
Every
thought-
day,
Right.
being in a management position, every day there's some miscommunication. It's so important.
So
to be
important.
very clear about
right.
your
right.
intentions.
That's right. Clear,
So
clear and
I'm
concise.
Completely there with you.
No, yeah, and so I share that with Sam. Where it's like we'll talk about God, for example, and we have slightly different views on this, and obviously being someone that's a music director at a church, I believe in God, but I don't necessarily believe in the sort of God that some other people believe in. Again, this is a whole conversation itself because I don't think any two humans on the planet believe in the same God.
Yeah, I agree with
There's
you.
no such thing. There are as many gods as there are humans who believe in them. And so I think defining terms is huge. So when we were in Palm Springs, I think it was, and we had a little conversation, and it almost got kind of heated because we were talking. He was saying, well, do you believe in God or do you not? And it's like, yeah. I just don't. I think we need to define these terms, and ultimately we came to agree that it is. We actually do need to do that. We need to really define these terms. What do we mean by truth, God, etc. There was a moment in the which one was it? Maybe the second
was
or
the
third one.
Yeah.
They were talking about evil. And they,
was it?
Yeah.
Oh, never.
Jordan
Just a different moment.
and Sam were. It was like an awesome moment. We were about to get this awesome definition of evil. Right?
I know what you're talking
And Jordan was like, "Well, we should really define that. Let's define evil, right?" And this was the first time I'd ever seen the tables flipped. Is that the right phrase?
I don't.
Tables turned?
I actually
Tables
don't
turned.
remember this. I got to rewatch
Yeah,
it.
so it's a short moment because Sam kind of dismisses it, unfortunately. And I got so frustrated because I was like, "Oh yes, finally Jordan wants to define something, right?"
Yeah.
And I was so excited.
a rare moment.
And I was really, really excited about it. And the audience kind of laughs, and Sam kind of almost mocks it a little bit. And he goes back to his baseline moral landscape argument of like, well, you've got this life A, which is thoroughly unenjoyable, and it's
Good life, the bad life.
yeah, exactly. You've got the life A and life B. And he's like, so obviously this is better than that. So we want to do things that bring us closer to that. I agree with that. But he didn't define what he meant by evil. He didn't define what he meant by bad, right? What does it even mean that it's good?
Yeah.
Right? Is it that you have more money?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean good. Is it that you're whatever. Is it that you're more prosperous in your career? Is it that you have higher status? Is it that you're in love with someone that you're really what is it? And they never defined that.
Yeah.
And then so then they just moved on without the definition.
I mean, it seems to me like
frustrated.
Would love to get your guys' opinion. Like, just listening to everything you're saying, thinking about it, it definitely seems like that is the fundamental problem with why it is so hard to come to some agreement in those debates. It seems like to me, just sitting here thinking about this, it's like it's impossible to define the truths of religion. If you want to go with the Jordan Peterson argument that religion is supposed to give us truths about how to be, like how to be a good person. That's what they're trying to do, right? But it's impossible to define those. It seems like there's no way, and that's why they come up in the form of religion, in the form of stories. It's why they're being told in that format, because there is no way to pin it down, because there's too many. It's infinite. There's too many infinite amount of ways you can act. We have so many emotions. I tend to think our emotions are gods. They are what control us. And that's even, a lot of religions. I mean, you can look back at ancient religions, and it definitely seems like when they're writing about gods and stuff, they were really trying to somehow articulate these insane emotions that control us and put them in the form of some way you can define it. And Jordan Peterson talks about this stuff too. But it seems like to me,
dragons.
It's really impossible. Yeah, it's really impossible to define specifically the truths of how to be as a good person. And that's why we have to have them in the form of stories, because there is some common thread. All of us, it's like what we talk about, the kind of fundamental existence is suffering. It's a hard fucking life being a human.
It can be.
It's infinite, and it's really hard, and there's an infinite amount of things to decide from and do. Isn't that what our brains are for? Our brains are meant to look at the infinite data that we're taking in with our five senses and turn it into a funnel that we can kind of see specifically and then make decisions based off of it. You can even argue, like Jordan Peterson has argued, that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is the mechanism that takes the infinite amount of data and puts it into a story that we can tell ourselves to function. Right. So I don't know. I mean, it's like, is there a way to define those terms? Like, will it ever happen? Yeah. It's like the fundamental deep problem.
Yeah. Well, I do have a lens issue sometimes depending on who I'm talking to. Not everyone is necessarily interested in answering those questions. So not everyone who pursues even a very religious person, I want to say, might not necessarily care what the definition of God or evil is.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about necessarily that's a shortcoming of theirs. It's just that they might not be using the religion in the same way or for the same reason. So, I mean, I even find a lot of professional philosophers or kind of pop philosophers who, by and large, are atheists, are more interested in religion than most religious folks. So if you meet your ordinary family member who says, "Of course I'm religious," and they have a relationship with God or a text of some sort or something like that, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to say, "Oh, good, I'm so glad to meet a theologian. Can you reconcile the problem of evil for me?" They're going to say, "What is that?" Right? They don't. So you have to kind of nerd out on this stuff in your own personal via your own personal curiosities. I think so. Sometimes, like with Harris and Peterson, it's almost it's like it's a luxury of being a Western intellectual to sit on that stage and go, "Gosh, what is this all made of?" And that's not a bad thing. I love that we've reached a point, humanity, that we can talk about these things and even argue about them in a civil way. But I hear them talk and give the most complex intellectual description of what it might be like to be religious or non-religious, but that's not necessarily why people are or are not religious. So you meet your everyday atheist or your everyday evangelical, and they're not going to say, "Oh, no, I went through every argument under the sun, and I used symbolic logic, and I talked to as many theologians and people of the opposite stance, and I just came to this conclusion. I didn't even want to. I'm just forced to believe this because it's so reasonable.
Yeah.
Often the other way around, right? Someone will be very drawn to a conclusion, and then they'll conveniently argue their way into backwards, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sympathetic that even all the words we're using in this conversation, if I made you tie down even one of those words and I said, well, give me the real dictionary definition of that word.
Yeah.
It'd be very hard for us to come up with that on our own, right?
Sure.
We're not, that's not our job though.
Yeah.
We're using these words to get ideas from one head into another. And somehow you followed everything I'm saying so far. And so I know it's working.
Right.
Going back to Harris and Peterson, sometimes I'll hear one of them say a word that doesn't click for the other one. Like Harris will say evil or Peterson will say God, and they'll go, wait, I know how I use that word, but I don't think that sentence made any sense.
Yeah.
Kind of like in the Deepak Chopra debate with Sam Harris, Deepak is talking about quantum physics and things like that. And a physicist in the audience comes up to the microphone during the Q&A and says, look, I'm going to be honest with you. Nothing you're saying makes sense, right? And Deepak reiterates something he said. And the guy said, I know what all of those words mean, but I don't really know what that sentence means. And that disconnect, to me, is very important. And I share Harris's and Kris's concern that, well, wait, if we're not even talking about truth being the same thing, how are we ever going to move forward? What are we going to be able to talk about if we don't even know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Right.
Which I think,
and maybe I'm wrong. I want to know, correct me if I'm wrong. I just need to make sure that we're not going to keep using these words
That's
and
right.
arrive at completely different conclusions.
yeah, I think
totally
that's definitely a big problem. And I definitely think just the idea of like science, it's like science. I mean, we kind of touched on it very briefly in the last podcast. I'd love to get both of your guys' thoughts, but to me, it definitely seems like religion, the stories, all that, the ancient stories, the ancient religions were the way that we navigated. It was the way that we articulated the way to navigate through life. That's how we did it. We observed, we started out with no language or anything, and we just watched and observed. And how do I feel? What is he doing? She doing?
Right.
How are they feeling? We formed language. We got more articulate.
What's
we started
working,
writing it
what's not
down.
working, right.
Everything started coming together into these stories, which is religion. And those were the way that we referred to those to help us navigate through the life. And then science came along, mathematics, all these objective facts came along and kind of obliterated a lot of science, because now we have these objective things going against like all those stories that we were using for thousands of years to help us navigate. But the objective things aren't giving us the answers. Like you can't read in a textbook and do a calculation to figure out, how do I make this emotional decision right now? I'm faced with these crazy,
two things come to mind. You could tell me which path you want to go down.
Yeah.
Antonio Damasio is a great, I guess he would be an authority on. He just changed my mind a lot with the distinction between feelings, emotion, and reason, and that those are three different things, but they're not independent. And I could do my best explanation of how those things relate, but also so the second road would be science with a capital S is a recent thing, right? The scientific community, let's say, very.
Yeah.
But objective truths are as old as mankind as well.
Yeah.
It's just hard to separate. Okay, am I tasting this fruit because it's good for me, or is it going to be poisonous, or just basic kind of information like that? And then you aggregate everything that and then you can test it and you can actually falsify information.
Gotcha.
That's very counterintuitive for people. Humans are just not that good at that.
Yeah.
So that being said, science never promises answers to questions. It doesn't owe you an answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, for example? That might not even be a scientific question per se.
Yeah.
That is to say, it's not a falsifiable question. It's not one that you could pose a hypothesis to. and say, I think the meaning of life is this. And then you could run a series of experiments and then falsify it and then say, oh, well, that didn't work out.
Yeah.
You could say you don't like it for sure.
Yeah.
And Peterson's good at saying that, is saying people do, quote unquote, test theories of meaning of life, and then they end up in despair or without purpose or something like that. But even that is a series of stories about meaning being this and not that.
Yeah, which is, that's like the problem, the issue that I see with science, with a capital S, I guess I would use that way to frame it, which is science with a capital S came along and started. It's not that science came along to give us the answers to those deep questions, but it took away the answers that we had and then doesn't provide us with answers. It like came along, took away the answers that religion was giving us, because now we have ways to measure all of these things. Like you can prove that there was the things that are said in the Bible. Now we can prove that it doesn't work. They're like miracles don't happen.
Kinda,
You know,
I mean, you kind of do whatever you want with the data, though. I don't. Who is science? Science doesn't, quote unquote, give or take away
or
anything. Right. Science is just this collection of information. I'm just noticing, if I had this cherished belief that that only eating Hot Pockets is the way to perfect health, gives my life meaning, I think it's what God wants for me, I'm just going to eat Hot Pockets all day, every single day.
Amen.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah, hallelujah for Hot Pockets.
Hallelujah.
And then one day, my local scientist in the form of a doctor says, oh, by the way, you're not going to want to keep doing that if you want to be healthy, because, you know, this is what Hot Pockets consist of, and you should really add something else to your diet, right? Yeah. I can still choose to eat. I could say, well, that's not my goal. My goal is to, Hot Pockets give my life meaning. And there's no one behind that door that's going to come out and say, sorry, you're wrong, because I can eat myself into an early grave through Hot Pockets if I want to.
Yeah.
Science doesn't determine that for me.
Yeah.
But,
well, I guess
there's an inconsistency there in my human brain that goes, wait, shoot, I thought that Hot Pockets gave my life meaning and that there was no contradiction there to my health.
Yeah.
Now I'm finding out that the health part was actually wrong, and I want to, you know. So
which
insofar as
that's
your goals,
a better way to frame the problem.
Yeah. If your goals don't converge in those areas, then you have a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
But you might not. It just depends on who you are, right?
Yeah.
Depends on what the issue of the day is.
Yeah, for sure.
And if I also think you're right, but I don't think it's totally science's fault. It's partly also religion's fault.
Yeah.
I think everyone
agree.
is to blame in how we've kind of gone to this almost Nietzschean, not totally nihilistic, but this what he thought would become this secular society that had nothing to replace it, and we're sort of
like
left
a vacuum of values.
Yeah, sort of like left in like in the abyss, kind of. I think a vacuum of values. Because what happens is, right, science comes along and is sort of a countercultural push against the oppressiveness of what religion had become.
Yeah.
But then the problem is that this is back like in the Renaissance, right, during the scientific Enlightenment. The problem is that religion didn't just accept it with open arms, and that would have been the greatest thing ever had they just. Had the
culture of
religion. Had the culture of religion and had the institutions and powers that be said, okay, well, let's go with this. Let's have both. Let's kind of adjust this a little bit. Maybe some of the stories are more fictional than we thought. That's okay. And I think that's what Peterson kind of says. Is that maybe it's okay that some of the stories aren't perfectly realistically nonfiction. Maybe it's okay that they're just stories, I don't think they lose their meaning because they're just stories. Yeah. I don't think they lose their function or their utility, or their usefulness, whatever it is. So, going through the 17th, 18th century, when you're going through all this change in especially in Western society, it seemed to me that scientists were really onto something, and the church knew it. And instead of the church saying, oh, let's explore this together, right? We're interested in truth and reality. You're interested in truth and reality. Let's all figure this out together. It became this tribal thing. And the church, you name it. Copernicus, Galileo and Kepler, all of them were basically socially chastised for what they believed. They were told to basically renounce their views and to say, and that, I think that's what kind of created this, each team digging their heels in, and it became this tribal battle.
Yeah.
And instead of religion growing and evolving in a way that would have been really productive, and science growing and evolving in a way that would have been really productive, and instead of being able to preserve both meaning and objective truth, you end up with this dichotomy of ideas that seem mutually independent and completely incompatible. And so nowadays, we're still left with the residue of this, right? Where we're still left with this, you have to choose. You have to choose if you want to be scientifically minded or if you want to be religious. And that breaks my heart. I hate that. I hate that we have to choose that. And why can't we find, again, this truth sort of in the middle, and so that's just sort of my thoughts on that, is that everyone's at fault.
I think I'm 100%, that's a really good way to put it, that figuring out a way to bring them together. And it's almost like you said, taking the story aspect of religion. It's like accepting that, okay, this obviously isn't like scientific fact, but these stories are still extremely beneficial and important. I mean, thousands of years went into like formulating this stuff. It's not just like some guy wrote some shit down in a book one day and it was the truth. Right. It's so much went into it, and trying to bring it together to figure out like, how can we navigate with recognizing the stories are important, and the science is a way to give us answers to certain things, obviously.
So just on maybe a more personal level, are you so drawn to this because you find it difficult to know what to do, to know how to choose? Do you look for a story because you need one in some way? Or?
Yeah, I'm honestly not. I don't really have a difficult time finding, especially now. It's like I just listen to my conscience, like we talked about before, and that voice tells me the shit that I need to do. And usually it takes me down a path that's right, which is just whatever you want to think of your conscience as being. Who knows what that really is?
Sure, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
I mean, you can call the number of labels.
Yeah,
it has
many names.
We all have these experiences.
When you tap into that and you meditate and listen to it, and you in every moment really try to become aware of it, it becomes clearer and easier to follow it, and it usually leads you down a path that's good. So it isn't that I don't know. I'm just really interested in it. Like I am very interested in human beings and why we act the way we act and why we are the way we are. And I'm really interested in the idea of consciousness. Like, what the fuck is consciousness?
Me too.
Good question.
What a mystery.
It's every day I'm thinking about, I'm this fucking weird body, like seeing shit through my eyes.
Right.
Like it's in this insane experience. That's crazy. If you really sit down and like start thinking about,
that's right.
Like, why are we here? What are we doing? That's what it is. It's just so interesting to me. And both things are so interesting to me. I kind of, before the Jordan Peterson video got me really interested in the more religious stuff, I was watching like physics videos every day and podcasts on physics and dark energy and the Big Bang and string theory and all that. And I was very interested in all that stuff too. But it all leads to the same, there is no answers. When you boil it down to, like, here's a good question. What the fuck happened before the Big Bang? What existed?
I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah. What do you mean?
If time began there was no, before it, isn't a word that makes sense in that question.
I mean, and that is, obviously that makes a lot of sense, but the question is still there of, okay, well, time began there, words, nothing existed before that. So it still begs the question, okay, well, why and how?
And we still don't know.
Why and how? What was before?
Go to a physics department.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So that's another super complex thing,
Yeah, and even like, I don't know how relevant string theory is now. Is it's like, a couple years ago, a few years ago,
not sure.
it was huge. Everyone was talking about it, and it was kind of
it's a little less popular,
but the question, even things like particles.
Like waves versus particles.
Yeah, waves versus particles. What is an electron? Right.
Where is an electron?
What is an electron?
What does it look like?
Right. I mean,
I think you can answer a lot of those questions.
I know. No,
you talk to the right people.
Yeah, and the feeling is like, what is an electron, and from my understanding of it, an electron is just a cloud of probability.
Yeah.
It doesn't even exist until it's
As far as I
observed,
understand.
right?
Right.
And those types of questions are it's all the same interesting, crazy, deep questions about this fucking life, like this existence of what we are. It's just it's not like I'm getting into it because I want to find the answers. I don't know that there are answers, but exploring it and just hearing the ideas and delving into it, it just invigorates me. I mean, it's just interesting. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what it is. It's just so interesting to me to explore it, you know?
So whether or not there's a connection between the Big Bang, electrons, and the meaning of life, what about the hanging on to a narrative or a story? It sounds like you were searching, or something was satisfied when you heard either the Peterson story or what people tend to be talking about when they talk about how to move forward. And I'm also curious how, when you listen to your conscience and you notice that it tends to lead you down a good path or you like the outcomes, how do you know that they're good, or what do you like about listening to that?
Well, I guess a big part of listening to your conscience is kind of, I guess the anchor of it is it's like telling the truth. It's like what Jordan Peterson always says too about the truth. You got to just tell the truth. You really need to tell the truth as much as you can, because the moment you start to lie or the moment you start to not tell the truth, you have so much shit piling up behind you that's there. That's just this pressure that's holding you back, and then everything you're saying, all the decisions you're making, you have to tiptoe around it because you have all this shit like behind you that just hasn't come out. And I think I guess that's a good way to think about it for me, is like listening to my conscience. It usually just a lot of the time is like, just be fucking honest right now. Like if it's some situation where I have to like say something to an employee, or I have to, it's usually like, listen, this sucks. There's things that have to happen here. You have to, even if it's like I have to fire someone or whatever, it's like, just be fucking as real as you can be. Like that's that's kind of what it goes back to. It's like, doesn't matter if it's going to suck for the person. It doesn't matter if you're going to come across as an asshole or unsympathetic. Just be honest. Just be real. And usually it doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means the outcome usually is good, because it's putting everything. It's putting the moments behind me so I can focus on what's in front of me. Like what Jordan Peterson has said, the truth puts reality behind you so you can focus on just what's coming in front of you and not have to worry about the shit behind you anymore. And
the truth will set you free.
And the truth will set you free.
I mean, that really is, I think, free from a lot of things. That phrase gets used a lot. But we forget that it's like I think Jesus was making, I'm not trying to smuggle Jesus, I'm sorry.
This is the Jesus that we're talking about. What's happening now?
But I really think there's a really profound truth there. I don't think he's just saying that if you believe in the truth that God exists. I don't think it's that narrow. I think he's saying all truth, right?
Yeah.
Being genuine, being yourself. And this was sort of the existentialist movement of the late 19th century, right? Was that if you are authentic in what you believe, you really seek truth first and foremost from your own perspective, right? And you go from there.
Yeah.
You develop an individuality that is unstoppable and strong, and you can persevere most things with the truth.
Yeah,
I
agree with that.
With that,
and I think that's what your
powerful.
conscience. That's what your conscience does.
That's right.
I mean, who knows really what your conscience does? Because you can argue, well, aren't there two different consciences? There's the one that's kind of leading you toward the good path, but then there's the one that like is berating you and like kind of pointing out all the shit that's wrong with you. I mean, are they the same? Is it? And when I say this, I'm not like fucking schizophrenic. I'm not saying like I hear these. You know what I mean? It's like just it's the dialogue happening in my mind.
But I love this. I would say I'm first and foremost a Christian, and second most like a Taoist. I love Taoism, and so this idea of basically chaos and order. And he talks about it all the time.
Love it.
But I think it's just that. I don't think they're necessarily having to be these opposite forces. As a lot of myths might say, but they're sort of complementary yet opposing ideals, and they can work together, right? Sort of in conjunction to make you better. Imagine if you only had one of them. There'd be nothing to juxtapose it with. You wouldn't know, right? Like you don't know necessarily what's true and what's real until you can identify what's not true and what's not real.
Definitely.
These sorts of things are obviously not paradoxical necessarily, but they're certainly opposing. We were just talking about this. This goes back to kind of like flow state, for example. I don't know if you've studied flow psychology at all,
I've
but
like listened to some stuff.
Yeah,
on it,
we've probably heard the words kind of float around, in the social ether. And flow state is this, basically it's incredibly Taoist as far as I can tell, where being in this flow state where you're confident, you feel competent yet challenged, you feel empowered yet slightly beyond what's really comfortable, right? You're in that perfect space between chaos and order, right? So like when I'm in the classroom and I'm having a hard time, it's usually because something is either too difficult or I'm bored.
Yeah.
And that's what seems to be the case when a lot of people say that they're not fulfilled with their work or their line of work. They say, oh, it's boring, or it doesn't challenge me, it doesn't interest me. So that means it's too comfortable. That means there's too much order, right? It's almost too predictable, right? But then there's also the opposite where people say, I am overwhelmed, I'm so stressed, I just have knots in my back all day long, right? There's too much chaos there.
Definitely.
That's too hard. That's too challenging. And so I think that that flow state is right in the middle.
Yes.
You have to be comfortable enough to be confident, but challenged enough to be right on the edge of your capabilities. And that feels good.
Yeah. What does that get at? Like to me, it seems like what that's getting at is those are the moments where you can grow, like truly grow.
I totally agree.
You're whatever that means, physically exercising.
Right.
You can expand your consciousness to whatever. It's like those are the moments where you learn and truly make gains. However whatever that means, like actually grow as a human being. Because when there's too much chaos, you're not going to grow because you're just being pushed down constantly.
Also, I think it's enjoyable also, but people are also more effective in that state that you're engaged as much as possible. So it's the more Taoist description would be the balance between doing and not doing. You're not overdoing it and not scrambling and making mistakes that way because your attention's so divided, but you're also not doing in the way that you're being lazy and you're leaving stuff out.
Right.
So you're surfing is a common activity that people discuss flow states, and just because of the unpredictability of the activity itself, of a wave or of nature, and then your own physical abilities to roll with it. So it's like the right amount, and chances are humans are going to be able to get in flow states that other animals wouldn't, right? We all have a different flow state. I wonder if like cats hunting or something would be like a flow state, right?
Yeah.
They're right on,
it's
something like that, right?
Kind of kicks in.
Yeah. So humans, you notice that this is just enough challenge met with competence. Yeah, like you said, capability. And then if you could just travel down that road, then you'll do a really good job. You'll get to that goal, whatever that is. Right?
Yeah, and I would say this goes right back to being really honest and genuine and telling the truth, and not just with other people, but with yourself.
Yes.
Like that's huge, right? Because how can you learn to get into flow state more often?
Yeah.
The only way that I can tell is by reflecting on what's going on, right? So after I teach, instead of just being like, well, that was a day, and I'm done now, and then tomorrow will be another day, and they're all just independent days.
Definitely.
You see it as a stream of events that will either get better or worse. That C.S. Lewis talks about this in sort of a more theological way, where there is no, I think you said this last week or when you last talked, there really is no neutral decision. There really is no neutral action. There's no neutral event. Everything moves you towards the better or the worse, everything. Yeah. And so in being honest with yourself and really like reflecting, so at the end of the day, I should sit down and go, okay, I'll just take a few minutes or on my drive home from work. I'll say, okay, what worked? What didn't work? When was I in flow state? And why?
Gotcha.
And thinking about, okay, and thinking about, okay, there was that moment. It was like 4 minutes. I remember that. And it was just on, no stuttering, boom, boom, boom. My mind was on. What was it? I want to know what that was. And I think about that all the time. And sometimes I actually write it down, and I write down some of the bullet points. We did this, and then we did this. And I'm finding that the percentage of time that I'm in flow state increases almost daily, at least this much.
That's awesome. And that makes me want to just mention something to anyone listening. The writing it down aspect of that is it's such an important thing. I just recently in the past, maybe month, have started journaling in a very kind of not like a emotional vomiting way. What I do is, it sounds like pretty much what you're doing. I write down kind of the bullet points of my day. And then literally like it's just one little sentence. And then next to it in parentheses, I put my energy level from 1 to 10.
Oh, I love that.
Write down the bullet
That's
points of my
great.
day and put my energy level next to it and kind of think about where was my energy the highest, where was the lowest, how can I increase it the next day? Like how can I avoid things that were lower? You know, how does that all add up? And it just sounds like what you're doing, just writing it down. It's a good technique. A lot of people talk about how important it is. Writing, journaling, it helps not only get your thoughts out of your head and down somewhere, but it's such a good, like, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think it's a really good thing. It's a good thing to practice analyzing when your energy is high, when it's low, when you're in flow state, whatever that means. So you can kind of aim for it the next day and avoid it, you know, avoid the things that were not good for you as much as you can, you know?
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me back to like, you asked me a question earlier that I didn't get to. You asked me, what did you ask me? You asked me like, why am I invigorated by the religious aspect? Or you asked me something like that a second ago. I can't remember, but
or the story.
I asked you a few things, but when you were talking about how to aggregate, how to filter all of humanity's stories and collected wisdom and things like that to form a story that's worth abiding by.
Gotcha.
And you're just talking about your interest in finding meaning, deciding how to get from one place to another. So my question was, I think my new question, I'm just thinking about it right now actually, is I just wonder if there's something about you that struggles to do that on your own, or that you're really drawn to finding a story like that, or developing one yourself.
Yeah.
But something about that, I just wonder.
It's a really good question. I really quickly too just want to apologize to you guys that I keep like aiming my attention. I'm just checking the peeking on my computer, making sure everything matches up.
Yeah, since you don't have the headphones.
Yeah,
on.
sorry. You know, I'm not taking my attention away. I just want you guys to know. But that's a really good question, and I don't know how to answer it exactly, but I do know, like, just that experience that I had with suicide it was basically, the feeling was that there was literally no reason for me to continue to live. No reason, no purpose.
No purpose.
What's the point? What was the point for me to continue living? I was only experiencing negative things in my mind, right? It was my mind. It was me, my fault, you know, kind of, it was the way I was perceiving things. But it was just no hope for my future. And I felt completely like I wasn't a valuable human being. And when you're in that place, it is, the meaning is, you know, finding the meaning is so important. And it's hard to articulate it. It's hard to explain it. It's like being completely hopeless about purpose in life. I wasn't in a career that I was enjoying, and I was just feeling, you know, I was feeling completely undervalued, not valuing myself. And I guess that's part of the reason why I've become passionate about it, is because I've experienced what it's like to feel that way. And I know how fucking hard it is to get out of it. It's really hard to get out of it. And it's so hard when you're truly in a depressed state, feeling like there's no hope for you. There's no reason for you to live, and you're not bringing anything to the table of life. It's so hard to get out of that. And it's almost like Jordan Peterson made me realize, and this is just my opinion on it, but he made me realize that the meaning in life isn't the material things. It isn't like, oh, my career. It isn't my daughter, my girlfriend, even things that you would typically think, like religion, family, friends. All that obviously can bring you meaning in your life. But from my perspective, it's much deeper, and the meaning can be derived from the actual playing of the game and growing, like expanding your capabilities as a human being, which you can do that literally at any time in your life. This conversation is that for me. Right. You guys are helping me see things in a completely different way, and we're challenging each other, and we're asking these questions that's making me really think. Right. And it's literally making me grow as a human being. And I was not at all aware of any of these ideas or anything really before. And realizing, wait a minute. I don't need other people to feel valuable. I don't need materialistic things. I don't need to have some career where I'm going to become successful and have $1 million and do all this. What I need to do is fucking grow and do the best that I can do in every moment to try to challenge myself and grow to help me and maybe help other people along the way. Like, I almost think of things as like, I think of things in terms of, we've talked about simulation theory a little bit. Like, I tend to really see things as, and I don't mean we're living in a fucking computer somewhere in the future. I don't mean that. I mean, like, we're living in a database reality. Everything that we're experiencing, literally, I think you can probably scientifically define it as information that we're interpreting with our five senses.
Right. Just interfacing with data at all times.
Everything is data, and we're interpreting it with our five senses and trying to form it into a story to help us move forward. And even more than that, in my opinion, we're doing it to help grow consciousness, to help grow the greater good, God, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's all about growing. And like realizing that really helped me in my life. Like, it made me value my fucking job that before I hated. I was miserable every day.
Same job.
Miserable. Same fucking job, if not way more responsibility now. And I fucking enjoy it now because I see it as, all right, here's the game. You're playing the game. How can you challenge yourself? How can you grow? How can you see this horrible, hard situation and manipulate it in a good way to form something that can help everybody in here and grow the whole thing. It's like becoming conscious of that and then really trying to act it out helped me. I guess Jordan Peterson was the spark to that, and then delving into all these ideas and thinking helped me realize that for myself. That's my opinion. And I guess that's the answer to like why this stuff.
I dig it.
It really invigorates me and really I'm passionate about it. And I think suicide and all that stuff needs to be talked about because it's fucking happening too much. There's too many people.
You're absolutely right.
There's so much depression and anxiety and people killing themselves. And it's fucking crazy to me that you can get to a place in your life where you feel so hopeless and undervalued that you fucking kill yourself. That is not okay. And it's because people are putting so much expectations on materialistic things. Social media, I believe like social media has a lot to do with it. It's talked about a lot too. You see all these people on Instagram posting the perfect moments in their life, and it's making you think these people have perfect lives. I'm a fuck up. That's not my life. I'm experiencing all this horrible shit.
Right.
So anyway, if I can rant on about that.
No, I agree. If we can circle it back, right? I think a lot of, I'm pretty sure about this stat, suicide, as far as we know, is higher now on average than it's ever been in first world nations, and there's something going on. I mean, we can't ignore that statistic, there, as far as I understand, I think anxiety and depression are at something like an all-time high, There were periods in history where it peaked, right? But as an average, it seems to be, in first world nations anyway, going up. And so what is that? What's causing that? I think it goes back to this sort of lack of meaning. When you abandon things like religion, and I'm not trying to smuggle that in saying we need to be all we all need to go to church on Sunday. I'm just saying when you abandon these stories, when you abandon these narratives that help to frame everyday life in a positive, forward-moving way, right? Where you're full of hope, you're full of faith, you're full of all these things, whether or not they're totally objectively, scientifically, perfectly true. When you abandon a lot of that and don't replace it with anything, there is a vacuum, there's a void that we are going to want to fill with anything, with likes on Facebook, with how many hours we spend on YouTube, with whatever, with shows that are significantly less meaningful and profound than any religious story, right? And we just spend our time.
You could argue that. You could.
I've spent a lot of hours of my life playing video games, for example, right? And I just hate League of Legends. But anyway, sorry. I'm sorry.
All of these things.
I'm sorry, Ryan.
I'm so ashamed.
No, really feel. I think you're making a good good point that that movies and comic books and video games and social media are like trying to fill the void that has been left because we're becoming more. It's like we're becoming way more wise and intelligent.
But I like that. Yes, video games are great.
And I'm not saying they're innately bad, right? Any of these things in moderation, etc. Right?
But it's an insightful reaction to have that. Oh my gosh, I just did something that only set me back. Yeah. Something that only...
I never play the game and think, oh, I'm now smarter.
Yeah.
I now feel better about... I'm glad
I'm a better person.
I'm glad I did this.
I mean,
I feel closer to people.
Right? You can argue that video
There are
games...
some games I feel better.
But as an individual, we all might be the only people that know that. Yeah. So you don't know whether that person's trip to Hawaii was the best experience of their life. They might say that on Facebook or wherever it might be, and you don't necessarily even, it's not even your job to test that theory and to go and to message them and go, no, but really out of a scale of 1 to 10, how great was it? You just have this internal reaction. Oh my gosh, I would like to do something like that. I wish I had more experiences like that. And not knowing the difference between a 10 out of 10 experience and a 1 out of 10 can be really bad. So that you go back to your 1 out of 10 experience. Daniel Kahneman is so good at this. He's the very famous behavioral economist. And just your remembered experience, your experiencing self versus your remembered self, or your narrative self are also going to be very different. Yeah. So even in the act of telling yourself that something was fun, there might even be this kind of placebo effect. You do something every time and you say, yeah, I kind of like this. I think this is a good way to spend my time. And little do you know, you're wasting your time. You might not even know at that moment until afterwards you check in and you go, I am 1 hour further into my life and I will never get that hour back. Yeah. And I totally regret it. Yeah. And I totally wish I did something else. And that doesn't mean to be time maximizing robots, because if you're never around to experience those benefits, then it seems not worth doing a lot of the time, right? I'm thinking of people who are just obsessed with, what would you call that? Letting people know how productive they're being as well. As opposed to being really into something and going, wow, this is really productive for me. Yeah. Someone who maybe ends up being really bright, but then I'm thinking of someone like Isaac Newton, where definitely if I want a question answered, I will go to him, but I don't want to spend more than 10 minutes with him because interpersonally, he was apparently a nightmare. He was apparently very difficult to be around. Right. So I'd rather be the interpersonal balance.
Would you rather hang out with him or Schopenhauer?
That'd be a depressing dinner.
There's a toss.
I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know.
You're right. Do I want to feel bulldozed or right? Nietzsche would be amusing at least.
I would love to hang out.
That'd be time well spent. That'd be entertaining.
Nut.
Yeah, that'd be a trippy time. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I can go back to when I work with clients. Not even client, not even professionally, but personally, I try to have face-to-face time where I'm really doing my deciding reflection, where I'm really going, okay, what was that like? How was that face-to-face time with that person versus that other, and screen to screen isn't always necessarily a bad thing, but face-to-face does something neurologically that I don't know that there's a replacement for. Yeah.
It is the highest form of communication.
There's got to be, you lose something with every distance. You Skype and then you FaceTime and you text and
It's very. It's a good point. In my acting class, I've had rehearsals just through Skype, and it's like, this fucking sucks.
It's
like this
tough.
isn't. This isn't the same.
It's a different world.
Really a good. It's a good thing to think about.
And I'm thinking of well-being. If even if you're the one telling me, it's a subjective report, right? I don't need to know. I don't need to test within you. You're just telling me, I feel good when. There might be a unique confusion in the 21st century. I don't know. I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist, but just speaking to the dissatisfaction generally of life, where comfort is confused with mental health or health, let's say, right? Where how easy is this for me? How comfortable is this for me? How little am I stressed out right now equals how well I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
So if I do this thing and an hour goes by and I just wasn't stressed out, if I convince myself that that means that was a good use of my time, I might be wrong. And the minute, the minute that's on the table, the minute I ask myself that, I was comfortable, but was that really conducive to my well-being?
Good point.
That those might be in conflict is the beginning of a conversation to me, not the end, of course.
It's a really good,
But you
good
go,
thing to
oh
bring
wait,
up.
wow, maybe that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And then you could have a
Which, I mean, that
crisis.
that ties into the notion of you should pursue happiness. Pursue happiness. Like pursue the
There's a big topic.
expedient
Your bliss or your
pleasure. It's your bliss.
Right.
I think that's a really good point to make, that it isn't about that. And I mean, I think somehow the internet and social media 100% ties directly into the higher levels of anxiety and depression and suicide. I mean, I don't know how, I don't even know the studies. I've read some stuff and saw some stuff talked about, but it seems like to me, internet came along and opened up the fucking landscape of seeing all these other people and having all the information. And then social media came along and puts people's lives right in front of you all the time. So now you have this constant stream of things to compare your own life to that wasn't there before. And it's constant. And that, I think that has to have something to do with people being more depressed, more anxious, all of it. Because it's like you have this picture being painted of someone else's life that you tend to believe that's amazing. Like, look at this person. They're so happy. I'm not. Yeah, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I think everyone has their problems. Everyone has their issues. No one's life is perfect. The people that look like they're the most beautiful and perfect and happy on Instagram, they're not. They have their bad days. I'm not saying they're not happy. Our everyone's happy, and you have your good times.
But even so,
but that's a good point.
It does stuff to us if we don't realize.
I'm just thinking of our economy of attention. You can only really focus on one thing at a time, and even that input that's a lot. That's a cognitive demand to look at all that to be on. Let's say Facebook is a good example. You're scrolling through, and even if I'm thinking, okay, it's all BS. This is just a snapshot. This is their most flattering side at their best possible moment. That's a lot to do. It's a lot to manage in that moment, as opposed to just
taking it at face
let's
value.
Say, not being on Facebook in the first place. Or spending time with someone in person where they're going to tell you every nuance, or you're going to get a better picture of how they are and what they're up to, and if you care, even in the first place. I think whatever seeps in, I wouldn't claim to know exactly what that is, but just the exposure in and of itself, right? Like, honestly, I mean, it'd be like wasting your time watching anything else that might be bad for you or even boring. Something, if you just watched bad movies all day, every day, and even if you sat there telling yourself, I know this is a bad movie, it's just cheesy, it's just for this kind of entertainment. That is what's going in. That is the input to your talk about consciousness. And instead of something else, you're doing that. And then at the end of the day, you're left with, I had 24 hours and I spent that time doing that thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I love the point about comfort, because it was William von Hippel or Himmel. Hippel? I always forget. But it was in The Social Leap, which I just finished not too long, which is a great book. And he's got a quote in there, and Yuval says something similar, where it's basically the idea that the easier life gets, the easier it has to be to keep you happy. And so I've noticed this, right? So like the more comfortable things get, the more comfortable you expect they need to be, because again, reality is and happiness is all about the expectations, right? So like if your expectations and reality match, you're happy, or at least content. And if they don't, there's a mismatch that creates this sort of dissonance in you. And I've noticed it in my own life when things are going really smooth, and it's just like, oh, things are good. I'm feeling really good about this last 3 weeks or whatever it is, right? Little things annoy me more, because the relative scale of annoyance has totally shifted.
Makes a lot of sense, definitely.
And so as things become more comfortable for me, any little inconvenience, which in a more difficult time in my life, those little conveniences would have just been another thing.
Yeah.
You're just, oh, whatever. I can just, I stubbed my toe. Well, I also have no money in my bank account. And so it's like the stubbing the toe doesn't matter, because things are difficult. But as things get easier, and I think that's where we're headed in society too. This is another point, right? Is that things are getting easier for us, right? AI, I mean, these sorts of, I think technology in general and any industriousness that makes our lives easier may very well be making them worse, in the sense that our expectations become so high, it's almost impossible to achieve that constant comfort that we expect. Yeah. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have progress, we shouldn't have technology, it's great, but we have to be aware of this is happening. And this is a real psychological and sociological phenomenon where expectations are being raised to a level that's almost impossible to constantly maintain.
And I don't even think it is good to maintain the comfort all the time. Like, I think you gotta.
I agree.
Like, I know for me, pushing myself as much as I can, like consciously, whatever that means for you, exercising. If it's a social thing, push yourself in a social way. Go to some party or some gathering. Whatever that means. I think it's important to do that, and I think the maintaining of comfort causes you to be unhappy. It causes it to, because you're not growing. You're not growing anymore.
Right. Long-term stagnation.
Yeah, it's it's a setup where
exactly.
You may have I'll speak for myself. If I don't want to go do something because it doesn't appeal to me in that moment, I'm making a decision for myself tomorrow as well. Yeah. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to say, there was that thing yesterday and I missed it, and I'm not getting it back.
Yeah.
And do I want to? How am I serving that guy tomorrow? And I don't like to think of my ethical obligations just as being towards you and everyone else. I'm a guy in my life too.
Yeah.
Like, if my life gets worse, everyone else may suffer with me. Or not just will I drag you down, but I'm going to become less good at living my own life, and my experience will suffer, and therefore my experience with other people will suffer.
Yeah, that's one.
So do you want to spend time the next day with the guy who went to the thing or the guy who stayed inside? And again, this is just an example. Sometimes staying inside is the right idea, right? You don't want to go.
It totally depends.
Pain and suffering are different, so
definitely.
Suffering for suffering's sake is not necessarily what I'm advocating. Yeah. But there's it's hard to know. I'm not perfect at this either. Sometimes I think, is this the right? Am I just wanting to do this thing because I'm forcing myself, and I really am not going to incur any benefit from this? Am I really going to make it worse? Do I really want to go spend time with these people or at this kind of thing? And maybe the answer is no. But again, it's hard to check in and say, am I talking myself into this or talking myself out of it? Am I going to regret it later?
Yeah, it's a very good point to make. It's hard to. I tend to think a lot of the time with myself, when there's something going on, something I need to do, or whatever it is. If I'm afraid, that means go do it, usually. But it's hard to judge, because it's like the fear is different. There are times when the fear is there to actually really help you. Right. But then there are times where the fear is there it's purely a insecurity type of fear. That is like holding you back from the growing that can happen. And it is really hard sometimes to know which, what's right and what's wrong, which is goes back to that question, like, how do you choose?
Right.
What is the answer?
One of the benefits of things like meditation and contemplation and just being honest with yourself, I mean, we were just talking about this, I used to work at a restaurant, and I know that's something like what you do, not quite a restaurant, but food, and I wasn't the manager, I was just a server. And I remember, when this was a banquet style thing. So it was like a magic show and a dinner, right?
Gotcha.
And it was a cool place. But I vividly remember, sometimes we would be cleaning up the room, and I would in my head think, okay, how can we best clean this room? Right? I would sort of plot out. I would kind of stare at the room and think, okay, we've got about 10 tables and this much, and we've got this many bins, and try and plot it out. And some of my other coworkers would also do that, and some would just start cleaning, right? With it's just go work, and they don't I don't think they realized that it actually would take them longer
Yeah.
without just sitting and thinking about it first.
Definitely.
And this is, I think, a microcosm of the macrocosm of life, where if you just sit and just think for a moment, okay, what would it be like if I went? What would it be like if I didn't go, right, to this thing? Well, what would I feel like tomorrow if I went? What would I feel like tomorrow if I didn't go? Which is, I love that you said about you're making a decision for your future self, not just your present one. But even just that 30 seconds or 2 minutes, whatever it is, of just like being honest with yourself, reflecting and being authentic with how you feel, talking about it with, I mean, you don't say it out loud unless you really want to.
You could.
Yeah.
You can talk to them. You can
Tell
talk to the
someone
elephant.
else.
Yeah.
We need to give him a name. I think that'd be nice.
Yeah, we could Let's think about it.
But yeah, we will.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really important process. Just saying, okay, what do I want? What are my goals? What do I want to be more like? What do I want to? And sometimes I think, like you're saying, your fear is actually a good thing. It's stopping you from going to a party that might actually be destructive for you. Maybe there's a lot of drinking. Maybe it's not, and you'll come home the next day hungover and gross, and it makes you worse.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just like a concert, and you'll hear some awesome music, be inspired, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those moments are really, really important.
Yeah, and this thought just popped into my head as you were saying that. It's kind of also just a fun thing. I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on it. Just to create, like I just thought of it. The fear that's meant to hold you back, that maybe in a good way, it's telling you don't go to this because it can be destructive. Mm-hmm. It's still almost up to you to decide the outcome. Even if the fear is telling me this will be destructive, don't go, and I choose to go, I'm still able to grow in that moment. It still could be a situation that's, it could be destructive, but I can still choose to do something with this or grow from it or learn from it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so hard to really like come to
perceiving
an answer,
Right.
Yeah. When I think about just evolutionary psychology or biology, I trip out. I trip out on what we are able to do in spite of the fact that our minds and bodies are telling us the opposite more or less all the time.
Definitely.
To eat the extra cookie, to avoid that person because they wronged you in the past, to avoid confrontations, to not put yourself in certain situations that, again, with our precisely. Yeah. So our comfort wanting us to get in and out of certain situations, we know in other ways where our minds and bodies are steering us wrong. We know that, especially with food or something like that, or exercise. Everyone talks about the New Year's resolution to go to the gym. Why? Because they know that it's a good idea for them, and yet they know that they organically are not that inspired to go. Same with any meal or dessert and things like that. So it's not like this is a brand new foreign concept. We're always battling a little. But you could go really deep you could go very narrow with that and into a very specific moment. And so I've been working with the addicted population in recovery for like my whole therapist career. And it's very close to home as well. And I get into this conversation constantly with people because that 30 seconds that Kris was referring to can make all the difference. Because if you're struggling with your drug of choice, and that in that 30 seconds you decide, screw it, this is an intolerable emotional state. I can't bear this. I need to be comfortable now. And you go out and use, then all bets are off. Especially if you use something that has a very strong chemical effect instantly, and then now you're not even going to be a good reasoner, and you're just going to go all the way, right? Yeah. So that 30 seconds between, oh, wait, is this another one of those times where my body or my mind are telling me to do the comfortable thing, or I'm telling myself a story. I'm telling myself a story about this is never gonna end. It'll never get better. I hate the way I feel so much. I couldn't bear to spend another moment feeling like this. If that is not a true story, then you're in good shape. If you know that's not a true story, you're in good shape. You can do something else. And like AA and 12-step programs have a lot of quips about this, like do the next right thing, don't run on self-will, things like that, where it's almost you're involved in a system that's smarter than you. So you can be in that system and it has already made a decision for you. Oh, we've prepared for this. You feel like that? You call this person,
Right,
call a
here's the
friend.
formula.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can do this all the time, right? You can say no cookies after 8 p.m. or I'm not going to use my cell phone in the bedroom so I don't stay up too late. We do this stuff if we need to all the time, you know.
And this is actually a great kind of circle back to the conversation about things like religion, right? I mean, talk about following principles that you yourself didn't think up, that you didn't create, following a system that's smarter than you, right? It's not perfect, you know, and there are things and I'm hoping in my life that we continue to see a reform of religion.
Yeah.
That it begins to be more open to things like science. It begins to be more open to social progress and things like that. And some churches do, and some churches don't, and there's a huge spectrum there.
Definitely.
You know? Which is why I don't like when people say things like, "Oh no, all churches blank." You know, that's like saying all atheists blank. It doesn't. Those sentences are often wrong.
Yeah.
Almost always. And so, you know, again, that's the benefit of things like order and systems, like you're saying, and processes that are above and beyond the individual. And like you were saying earlier, have sort of been tested over time, you know, and aren't perfect, but have come somewhere and arrived at where they're at for a reason.
Yeah.
And to cycle this all the way back to Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, I think one of the points in which they differ is and I've told him this before too a lot, I think Sam doesn't have enough respect for the stories of religion, and Jordan might have too much. And I think that at a certain point, hopefully they have that conversation.
Yeah.
And I think they've tried to, and they, again, bog down on terms and things like that. But, you know, for example, I think it's possible that, and this is kind of heretical to some people, I think it's possible that Holy Scriptures don't need to be perfect. You know, that's a human tendency to say, oh no, this thing needs to be perfect because I need it to be perfect, right? And that's okay. It's okay for there to be errors, and it can still be profound.
Definitely.
Again, we don't have to choose, like it's either perfect or it's baloney. And I think that, for example, Sam might say something like, well, it's not perfect, so it's baloney. And I think that's wrong. I think, as far as I can tell, there's so much more there, right? But I agree with Sam in that when people need it to be perfect, that's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, you might address, why do you need that? Why do you need that absolutism? You know, why do you need to know for sure? Why can't you be okay with mystery? Why can't you be okay with just inquisition as its own end for this specific topic? You know, and I think Jordan would push back on Sam in the same way. You know. Anyway, so that was just another thing I thought of is that you've got this order, but you also have to understand that there is flexibility in life. Things are always changing, you know. You know, it's really interesting, right? So the things that are the strengths of something often tend to be its downfall or its weakness, right? So the upside is the downside, so to speak. You know, so like the order and the consistency and the rigidity of religion is its strength in that it's a system that people follow with principles and ideals that help them live every single day and look at life through a frame that they don't have to doubt. They can live with hope, faith, etc., right? And they can follow the formula, which works a lot of the time. Works, whatever that means. You have to establish goals. But the downside, the other side of this is it's also rigid. And sometimes doesn't allow for progress, doesn't allow for change, doesn't allow for spontaneity, doesn't allow for new information, right? That's where I push off from religion. And I would tell anyone this, you know, that's where I push off when someone says, I don't know, it's always like this, it'll always be like this is how it has to be. I think I think that person maybe should think about why they need it to be that.
Yeah.
Where else in your life do you need absolutism because uncertainty scares you?
Well, and that would make, I mean, that's some really, really good points you're making. And I actually agree with it completely. It's such a good way to put it, you know, and that can tie into, it ties into kind of why a lot of Christians are conservative, right? I mean, it definitely ties directly into that.
That's 100% right.
And why a lot of this is a very general statement, obviously. Really liberal people are not Christian, religious, whatever, because it's a personality trait that people who are very orderly people that have those traits fall right into that.
Sure. This is order. Jonathan Haidt, Righteous Mind.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. And it's a very good way to put it. It's also, and it also saying all that reiterates for me why religion has kind of, why it's so important and why it has been around so long and why it's so hard to let go is because religion it's how many thousands of years has it been around? How many stories and stories and stories and stories and stories have been told for so long to finally come to this thing that we can hold in our hands and read and look at. It's not just something that was made up. It's like it took a long time for it to get there.
Right.
You know,
and it has a function.
Yeah.
Just like everything that stays around.
Which is why Jordan Peterson would argue that religion holds meta truths, because it's like it took this long to get there. It's an accumulation of so many archetypal stories and people and observations that people made and wrote down, stories being told verbally over and over and over and over, that it accumulated into what it is, which makes it the meta truths, because there is truth in it, in a sense that these are actual things that people have been observing, writing down, and talking about for so long.
That's right.
You know, but it needs to be updated.
Right. And the stories and the terms and the specific principles that come from it and the way that they explain it might be wrong, might be off. They might be outdated.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the truths behind them are outdated. It doesn't mean that all of the moral principles and all of the things that we derive from them and then apply to things like society, right? We were just talking about this. Where did the humanistic egalitarianism come from? Why do we believe in egalitarianism? Why do we believe that everyone is equal in value, right? That and I think it was Yuval who first, I think it was in Sapiens, who first kind of like hit me with that point where he said, that's a religious idea, like in the sense that it's not totally founded in science, right? That doesn't mean it's not a good idea, right? So like, I think humanism is a good idea. I think the idea that like everyone has value and all humans have value, right? But science doesn't really support that.
That's true. I was about to say that.
It's not. You can't really test that hypothesis either,
right? Because what do you mean by value, right?
Exactly.
And everyone is different.
It's not a cosmic truth,
right?
Like that the Big Bang occurred or something,
right?
But this is why Yuval is so brilliant to me, that he can cut down your most cherished, the
things you think aren't.
I would have said
crazy.
Certainly, if I know one thing, it's that being a humanist is the safest possible ethical standpoint for, what could be more simple?
Right. We'll all agree on it.
How could you possibly argue against that? And so he broadens the scope a little bit to say that he's not even questioning necessarily the utility of that beliefs. Like, we could all do better to be more humanistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we all
can you just define humanistic just for anyone that might?
So he would say that I don't know that he would say, but my folk description of humanism would be that our ethical quandaries are centered around well-being and the implication that all humans carry the same net value. So that if I'm
and that we don't need religion to get there. That was one of the things.
Secular humanism would be that supernatural beliefs are not part of that equation, right? So if someone says, I'm a humanist, they typically would say, like Kurt Vonnegut or something would say, I'm a secular humanist. Essentially, I have no supernatural beliefs behind that, but that humans are, the human increment of one is the currency of any ethical decision, right? Gotcha. So you think, great, yeah, so everyone starts with qualities that they didn't choose. We're all born a way that we did not design for ourselves. So of course we need to acknowledge that. We need to treat everyone from the same starting place, right? So you've all honestly wouldn't argue against that premise. He wouldn't say, oh no, some people are more valuable than others. He's not even saying that. He's just saying, look, question that. Really check in with yourself. Where did you get that idea? And if you go back, you don't really have a good answer. I don't have a good answer. I just really like that. I would love to live in that world, right? Yeah. And that's not a good, if I'm really being honest with myself, that's not a good reason to believe necessarily anything, because I might have that same reason about something totally evil or awful.
Yeah.
I might say, oh, I'm not a humanist. I think some people are more valuable than others. And it just feels right?
Yeah.
You and I could argue about that, but we have the same reason. Turns out humanism might be a more ethical standpoint if my goal is to have people treat each other, with the golden rule or the way we would want to be treated, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yuval would go a step further and say, well, humanism doesn't include other sentient creatures, and that's a shortcoming of humanism, is that it has human, right, in the name.
And Peter
So-
Singer would agree.
Singer would agree all the way. Yeah,
would
that's
like
for
that.
sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So hence Yuval being a vegan and being really outspoken about animal rights and things like that.
Yeah.
So that being said, there's a story for all of it. There's a story about everything.
And it
you know?
ties a lot of that together. It
Yeah,
creates-
yeah.
And from that, we derive a moral framework
Yeah.
that, like Kant would say, you have to just agree on. You have to say, where's your starting point? What's your goal? Right? And then go from there. You know, and you don't even have to agree on all the fine details of which myths or which ideas you believe in, but you create this set of principles that now everyone's following, or at least trying to follow.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back to one point. You were talking about the right and the left, and how it kind of relates to being secular or religious. And I just think there's a big point here that we should really point out. You know, the left, I think, is going to a point that's so far away from order that it's becoming chaotic. And we see that happening, right? Because again, this is that sort of dichotomy of order and chaos.
Yeah.
The further away you move from one, almost inevitably, the closer you get to the other.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not even saying that I think right or left is right. You know, I mean, again, I think sort of, I almost take like the Tao approach, like the way being where the two converge in the middle.
Yeah, that's I make that conscious effort like every day. That's the way I think. It's the way to try to be. It's obviously impossible, but I think I'm with you. Balance.
It's hard, and I get sometimes you have to choose like the lesser of two evils. And there's voting is hard, and like politics are frustrating, et cetera, et cetera.
Definitely.
But I think at least as a society, and especially as individuals, every day we should be aware. Okay, if I'm not following the way of order, what am I following? You know, am I just a counter movement? Am I just trying to disprove religion, for example, or am I just trying to disprove science? If you're on the other side of it, right? And to me, when your whole life kind of becomes a premise that's based in just a counter movement or an antithetical premise, right, or a
Don't just be against something, be about something.
Right. So if your whole life is just to be against something, you know, and you see this a lot in politics, and I hate it. It comes from that tribalism, where people are like, oh, I don't like Hillary, you know, and I don't like Trump, but I really don't like Hillary, you know, and it's like, so I'm going for Trump. And it's like, well, that's as far as you thought about that? You know, I mean, there's a lot, this is a complex issue, and I wish you'd say more about it than that, you know, or the opposite, where people are like, well, I just don't want the orange guy in office, so I'm voting for Hillary. And it's like, I think they're both equally as misled, you know, or close to it anyway.
Definitely.
And so again, tying back to that chaos and order thing, it's like there has to be that line in the middle where, just like flow state, where it's like, okay, truth very likely exists in between the polarities. And I'm not the first one to say this, obviously, right? I'm echoing a lot of really smart people before me, you know, but I just think there's some real truth there. And I think it begins, like Jordan Peterson and Rogan and Jocko would all say, it begins with you. It begins with the individual, right? You don't want people to be tribal, don't be tribal. You don't want people to be one-sided, you know, don't be one-sided, you know. And I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but it's that, if we can keep that in the forefront and the back of our mind, like at all times, you know, and just kind of check in and be like, okay, when faced with confrontation, when faced with a debate, when faced with a disagreement or whatever it might be, what am I doing?
Yeah.
You know, am I being tribal? Am I just pushing against this because I don't like it and it's uncomfortable and because I don't like that kind of person, etc.? Am I afraid of that idea? Am I afraid of change? Just being honest with yourself, you know, and that's huge to me. And trying to find that balance between the chaos and order, and then living that out, I think, every day in every moment, you know, and not to sound like self-helpy, where it's like, yeah, it's just all about you, and
But
you just gotta. But there's
I'm
something
glad we're
empowering
talking
about
it, because it is. I'm passionate about that too, and it can very easily lean toward the hippy dippy, like self-helpy,
right?
And it needs to just be. It needs to be talked about in a more pragmatic way. Like, it's actually very important to make the decision to consciously try to be balanced and not let your ideology possess you, because everyone's going to have ideology. We all have things that we believe and we choose and whatever, but it's you can make the choice to try to not let it possess you. Even if there is this thing that I'm against that and I'm for this. If you're in some quarrel with someone, you can still make the choice, but let me still approach this from a standpoint of actually really paying attention, really listening, and not trying to win, right? I mean, it's very important to talk about this, because there's just too many people that are either completely on the like hippie side of like pure love in every moment and not like just letting go of too much. And then there's people on the other side completely that are way too orderly, and they'll just shut you down immediately if you don't agree with them. And the balance is important. It's definitely, you're 100% right. I'm with you there.
It's
Definitely.
huge. And it's hard.
Yeah.
And I mean, like we have to acknowledge it. Like, it's not just like, oh, it's this easy. You just do this, you know? But
It's
again,
a lot of practice.
That's right. But again, practices like meditation, practices like prayer for those who are very like attuned to their more spiritual side or whatever.
Definitely.
Whatever practices help the individual to be able to do that at a moment's notice, you know, just kind of on call. It's great.
Do you guys have any tips, tricks that you kind of practice? I know meditation, big one.
Yeah, but I was just going to just hedge that a little bit. There are other gurus out there, or not necessarily religious gurus, but self-help people, right? Where it appears as though they're just compiling a big list of like a to-do list. Like, okay, if you only do this, then you'll be happy at the end of the day. And if you ask them, well, when do you relax or when are you creative? They'll say, oh, every day at 2:30 for 15 minutes. Right? And you're like, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, when are you not thinking about what time it is? Or when do you make plans with somebody and then just see where it goes? Or when do you have unstructured, you know, and they'll say, well, I structure my unstructured time, you know, or, well, this person, this famous successful, quote unquote, successful person does this. They vacation 2 weeks a year in France. So I'm going to get a chateau and I'm going to make sure that during, you know, that it's just exhausting to me to think about that.
That's
too much
the pathology of order.
Absolutely. And it's missing the point to me that happiness is much more a verb than a state to me. It's not, it's not, happy is not necessarily an adjective in the way that happiness is not a place that you go. It's not, you don't go, I'm happy here and I'm not happy here. You are being happy at certain points in time. And again, I just really want to disconnect pleasure or comfort from what we mean when we say, yeah, life is really good for me right now.
Yeah.
You know, I'm really happy. When I work with clients, especially that are dissatisfied with, I want to say aimless. They're dissatisfied with their direction.
Yeah.
There's no answer that I'm going to give them to say, well, just do this, this, and this, and then you'll be on the right track. It's not a railroad, you know? You don't just end up there. They go, oh, I should have got on the A train instead of the B train. That's why I'm not happy.
Yeah.
I need to marry this person instead of this person. I should get this job instead of this job. The process of figuring it out is analogous to every decision. We are always doing something at every moment. So I want to dissuade people from imagining that they'll never know what makes them happy, or that they'll know definitively what makes them happy, and then they'll never have to think about it again.
Yeah.
So I just even,
that.
and I think we might be rounding the 2 hour mark.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
or close to it.
Yeah.
I'm really reluctant to give advice. I don't give advice really. I might say, well, this is definitely not in my clinical practice, but even on a person-to-person basis, I'm reluctant to say, do this, right? Because the implication is this worked for me, therefore it would work for you, which is not necessarily true. And the opposite too. Well, what doesn't work for me will also not work for you. Because if I'm giving them one suggestion, I'm not giving them other suggestions, which means I'm excluding those things from my list of suggestions.
Yeah.
Even if I had 1,000 suggestions, why don't I have 1,001? What about that other thing? You know,
Definitely.
And so just to reverse engineer that too. When somebody says, "This is just my belief," or "This is just how the way I do things," but there's an implication for you, I also that raises red flags in my head. Like if someone says, "Well, it's just my belief that gay people shouldn't get married, and you're a gay person and you want to get married to your partner," and I say, no, you can't fault me for that. It's just my opinion. It's just my belief system. I'm going to vote against your right to, that's when things get political.
Yeah.
I'm not that interested in politics in general, but that's like the classic American paradigm.
Yeah.
So when we move into other things, like if I say, no, I have nothing against Sam Harris, I'm here for Peterson though. And every time Peterson makes a jab at Harris, I'm applauding and I'm like, yeah, team. That's getting further, to me, further away from where I want to be when I meet another person. Like I said before, worst case scenario is I have an interaction with somebody and I go, oh, well, I still pretty much think what I thought before, and I'm just glad I tested my ideas. And best case scenario is I'm wrong for less time than I had to be. I'm less stupid, or I'm less ignorant than I was. And to the extent that I like the tribalism point, to the extent that I am a member of a team and that we have team wins and losses, I even if I agree with the team outcome, even if I think, great, that's a step in the right direction for this group, I still worry, at the end of the day, now I'm on a team where I have to live with a team that feels like losers. And if my team won, how am I going to go back and hang out with this other team if the entire time all I was setting up was noticing how different we are, right? You're this, but I'm this.
Right.
Sorry, losers, right? We won this round.
Yeah.
That I don't want to be on either side of that, to be honest with you. I don't want to lose, quote unquote, but I don't really want to be a member of a team in the first place where I don't get to speak for myself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap this up. I think it's a good point to make, and it's how I try to practice every day. I really do, and I'm very happy I'm in a position where I do have to make choices every day that are about literally like the team. It has to be about the benefit of the greater good. Very important to it's a choice that you make. You can make the choice, which I was gonna say. That's a lot of this boils down to, as an individual, do the best you can do to just make good choices. I mean, it's kind of like make the best choice you can make.
And maybe if you don't mind my complimenting you at this moment, I noticed that we've been talking this whole time, going on 2 hours, and we haven't landed on something where we said, oh, okay, that's it, and just kind of called it quits, and we were just like, check that box, right? We didn't arrive at some conclusion.
Yeah.
We were like, oh, that's how you be happy. That's how you find meaning. That's how to me, the choice was just show up and have this conversation.
For sure.
Do it more often. That's Kris and I do this all the time. Just have the conversation and then see what happens.
Yeah.
And my prediction is that I think I'll be better off on the other side of this conversation no matter what happens.
Definitely.
I'll be better at having the conversation, and I'll be less susceptible to those automatic, reactivity or the automaticity that goes along with kind of fighting for something or trying to preserve my most cherished ego or beliefs. That I'll shed a lot of that defense.
Definitely.
And just be okay with whatever happens next.
Definitely.
And if I can sort of, at the fear of trying to create a conclusion. But if
a final thought,
I do have
concluding thought.
I was just thinking about it. It's there's such a positive. There's so much use in function itself, and it's almost difficult to say. I think the reason conclusions are hard to come up with is because it's really hard to find things that work across the board, like you're saying, right? So it might actually work really well for someone, but not for somebody else. I think it has a lot to do with what's motivating you and what your intentions are, right? And what your goals are. You have many types of people who go into church, for example, but there are two types in my head right now that I'm thinking of. Person A goes in and wants to go to church to feel righteous, to feel vindicated of all the things they may have done that week that didn't go well or were sinful or were missing the mark, right? They want to go in feeling kind of like they're part of the in crowd, the group, right? They've got the truth, they've got the answer, and they leave there feeling high and mighty. And then all week they try and let everyone else know, oh yeah, I've got it and you don't, and let me help you, right? And there's some benevolence there, but I'm overall not impressed with that approach. Then there's the second person that walks in and just wants the experience of church. They're okay with just being there, no ego, no motivations that are ulterior motives. It's not like I'm here to be a part of the club. I love the worship. I love the spiritual atmosphere that's here. I love the calm that I get from it, and I love the challenge that I get from the sermon, et cetera, right? And there are many types of people that walk in, but let's just say those two, for example. You can make those two you can make that case of those two people in almost any domain.
Yeah.
You know, it can be in almost anything. They're, you know, like who walks into the gym? Some people go into the gym because they want to become a better version of themselves. They just want the experience of working out. They want to be healthier, etc. Some people go in just to show off their muscles and get hot chicks and whatever. I mean, and I'm significantly more impressed with one approach than the other.
Yeah.
And so I think it has a lot to do with function, you know, which is why I don't like, which is why I don't like phrases like, oh, all religious people blank.
Yeah.
And they're all blank. You know, I'm not impressed by those phrases, you know, and it's all about function and intention, motivation.
Yeah. Maybe one last thing I'll say that maybe is a summary of like what both of you guys are saying, at least the way that I took it was, it isn't about winning. It's not about trying to achieve the goals you have. It's almost like it's about, let's use a conversation as an example. This conversation was not about an answer. It wasn't about accomplishing some goal. It wasn't about pushing some opinion. For me, this conversation was about learning how to have a good conversation so I'm prepared for the next conversation.
Yeah.
And we did that. We all did that. We all sat here. We had an amazing conversation.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's great.
It's been real.
It's been awesome.
Yeah.
I thank you, Chris. Thank you, Hunters. It's been great.
great.
My
Definitely
pleasure.
want to
Thank
have
you
both
for
of you guys back on again.
having
My
us.
pleasure.
So much
Anytime.
stuff to talk about. So
Yeah.
Let's do it.
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thanks.